Hey everybody, this is episode 19 of Tandem Podcast. When I started this podcast, someone I knew that was absolutely essential that I interview was Andrew Broussard, and I didn't really know when I was going to do it, but basically all I knew is that it was probably going to be really long because there's so much history there, and I contacted him pretty early on since I started this podcast, and as being a company owner of Proto Scooters, he's just so busy all the time, and just kind of randomly out of the blue, he said, hey, I have some free time for like a week before I have some other stuff to do, and he was able to do this podcast, and it really couldn't have come at a more perfect time because the day after, I believe, this podcast is releasing, and the day after all of you will have listened to it, is the 10-year anniversary of Proto Scooters, which is pretty wild. I had the great opportunity to be a part of Proto Scooters since the beginning, and I since then left for Tilt, but my time on it was great, and I still have a good relationship with Andrew, thankfully, so I just thought it'd be a great opportunity to have him on the podcast. And if you don't really know, Andrew started the Scooter Resource Forums, which, in my opinion, really accelerated just like the overall community of scootering in the beginning when everybody was so spread out. And he then went on to start the parts company, Proto Scooters, which have had a lot of amazing team riders over the years. And since it's pretty much an all-new team from the original team, but they're still doing well, still making amazing videos, so I'm always glad to see that they're continuing from really, I mean, they were like the first freestyle scooter parts company in my mind. I can't really think of anything else, but as always, look for the links in the description to see all the relevant topics that we're discussing. It really helps to give some context if you go through and watch those videos, maybe as you're listening or after you're done. It takes a little bit of time to search for those videos and find them and link them, so I just hope that they are appreciated by all the listeners. So here it is, Andrew Broussard. So you were the first wave of scooter riders, really like freestyle scootering, and you were just on Razor scooters when Razor was basically the only sponsor. So just talk about the early days of scootering.
The early days in scootering was, totally different than it is today. Obviously, there was only really one company making a scooter, and there were a lot of other copycat companies trying to make the portable mobility scooters to kind of hit that peak popularity in the early 2000s, but none of those scooters were ever designed for freestyle, and Razor did probably at that time have the highest quality. Most of the copycats were basically terrible toy scooters. You couldn't even hardly ride anything other than a Razor back then, just because they had the best technology and tooling and production out there. And even though they weren't designed for freestyle, they were still kind of the best option at the time.
So since Razor was really the only option to get sponsored, and I know you like tried to get sponsored by Razor, what was that process like?
When I was just getting started riding scooters, I started searching out, trying to find other riders, and naturally stumbled across videos from Team Razor, and namely Razor Evolution, and that was kind of an eye-opening video when I first saw it. It was definitely one of my first introductions to freestyle, to seeing other people doing freestyle. I thought I was kind of like the only one. I think most people at that time thought that they were the only one until they started finding others who were doing it. So naturally, seeing the only real scooter team at the time, that became the goal, to be part of that team. So fortunately for me, I was living in Southern California. Most of the team at the time was from Southern California, and Razor's headquarters were in Southern California. So I was in the right place, and I just started reaching out to some of the team at the time. I think probably the first Razor rider I actually spoke to was probably Josh Toy and then Ricky Wernicke, and we ended up meeting up a couple times and riding together, and that was kind of my introduction to Team Razor. And I kept in touch with those guys and went on some trips with them. We did a demo in Vegas. I went to Woodward with them for RVM2. I was really trying to push my limits and prove to them that I was capable of being part of the future of their team and the future of freestyle riding. And I was just trying to, a young kid trying to make a name for themselves. And I was pretty dedicated to that cause. And ultimately, I think my vision of the scooter industry and the sport was different than corporate Razor's vision and idea of selling mobility scooters. And so that relationship never really went a whole lot farther than that. And that experience just kind of, it basically sent me on a mission to build my own industry the way that I saw that, or the way that I thought it should be.
That's funny you mentioned Razor Evolution. I actually have like a VHS copy on my shelf of it.
We have a little museum of sorts here at the TGE headquarters, Proto River Heligrip Distribution Center here, and it's basically the pretty much like the first 10 years of important innovations and just history that kind of contributed to the early days of the sport. And I still have a sealed, like in the package, Razor Evolution VHS, which is pretty awesome and rare, and a few other random VHS tapes that are honestly horrible. But at the time when they came out and I was a kid watching them, I thought they were the coolest thing ever. But I mean, in retrospect, they were pretty terrible videos.
And you said you were in RVM2, is that right?
Yeah, so in RVM2, basically the Razor team went out to Woodward, and it was kind of funny because Richie Velasquez, he was one of the camp directors out there at the time, and he is an inline skater. And so when he was contacted to have Team Razor come out to Woodward, he was under the impression that it was Team Razors, like Razor's skates. So he consented to have the team come out, and then when the team got there, a bunch of scooter riders rolled out of the van, and he was very confused because he was expecting the inline team to show up. We were already there, and he already gave us permission, so we got to ride at the facility, but it was actually kind of a misunderstanding that first got scooters into Woodward.
Yeah, I mean, would he have just said no, probably, if he knew?
Richie is actually an awesome dude, and I think he's very, very humble and very understanding, especially coming from the inline world, just about the struggle that some people in sports face in the action sports industry. So I don't know. I don't think he himself probably would have said no to it, but potentially the higher ups at Woodward, because it is a big corporate entity. I mean, it's possible that they might have shot it down if they had known, just because at that time, scooters really were kind of this unknown, uncertain thing. There weren't laws regulating it. Things could have possibly turned out a little bit different if they had known.
Since RVM2 came in the Razor scooter boxes and people like all over America, that was probably their first introduction to freestyle scootering. I mean, I know it was definitely mine. I mean, it wasn't RVM2, but it was RVM1. So what did it feel like to be in that video?
It was a little bit surreal, like actually seeing myself, edited into a Team Razor video. Like that was kind of like a childhood dream come true of sorts, and it felt like an honor and a privilege, I mean, and I think it was being part of that kind of milestone in the history of the sport.
Since you said, like, obviously that relationship with Razor didn't really work out, did you want to start a scooter like parts company, or did you want to start the Scooter Resource Forum? Like, which came first?
At the time, my attention was not on manufacturing parts. I wanted Razor to make stronger scooters, but I didn't really know what that meant at the time. Like, I knew that the stuff we were riding didn't quite hold up as well as we would like it to, and so I was hoping that a company with the resources that they had would have stepped up and made, a higher performance scooter. And so I was kind of like leaving that at the time up to a scooter company. I wasn't a scooter company, so why would I think about making scooter parts at that time? For me, the more important thing was unifying the sport and trying to bring all the riders together. So there were a few other forums at the time. There's Razor Pros was, I guess, one of the bigger ones. There was the NBS forums. They were good, but they didn't have like a unified community behind them. And so that's where I saw what I thought could be my potentially be my largest contribution to the industry, was actually kind of build a platform for the community to come together, or just to facilitate a community that didn't really exist at the time. Scooter Resource kind of became like an incubator. Like, that's where the infant industry came and developed and basically became what it is today through that forum and that community and those discussions that happened on the message boards. And that stuff doesn't even happen anymore. And I don't even know if it needs to happen anymore, because the sport is in a more mature place. There's a lot less trial and error going on now, and the Scooter Resource was just kind of like a testing ground, basically.
So you said, I mean, there were those other forums like Razor Pros and stuff, but this was sort of pre-social media days, so there were forums for really any topic, not just scootering. So were you inspired by specifically those scooter forums, or just forums in general? Because that was sort of like the way to have like a community around whatever topic and find out how to do stuff back then.
At that time, early 2000s, everybody was on forums. Forums were like the main place that people communicated, because, like you said, that it was pre-social media. Like, there wasn't other ways to communicate. Like, I had a cell phone, and it was black and white, and it folded open and had a keypad. That was it. There wasn't apps. There wasn't Instagram, Facebook. I mean, this is like pre-MySpace. Like, it was just message boards. And I had some friends who were, I guess, kind of computer nerd type dudes, and they were all about like the 4chan forums and the Something Awful forums, which were like big computer forums. And those were the same guys who helped me kind of develop the first few iterations of Scooter Resource and the first forum. And I had taken like some web design classes, just like learning basic HTML and databases and stuff when I was, I think probably like my junior year in high school, which would have been about 2002. And so with that little bit of like web programming knowledge that I had learned, and my kind of computer nerdy friends' help, seeing them, actively use these forums and these message boards that were getting just massive amounts of traffic, it just seemed natural that I should try and do the same thing for the scooter community. And, kind of like the field of dreams, like if you build it, they will come. Like I wanted to build something and I wanted to see if people would actually show up. Like if there actually were people out there who shared my same interest, and how many of them were there, and where are they from, and what do they think about the current state of this fledgling sport, and where do they think it has the possibility to go. That was kind of like the initial concept behind Scooter Resource. Just build something and see who's out there. Like a lighthouse, you shine that beacon out there and just see who it attracts. And it ended up building a pretty huge community.
Yeah, I think the initial community was everybody had the same thing in common, that they thought they were sort of the only scooter rider. Then they were able to, log onto that community and actually connect, because it was probably, at that time it was like hardly even one person in every state in America, maybe like a couple people in separate towns or something. But I feel like for the most part, it was like the sole individual in their town had no idea that other scooter riders existed, and all they could do to connect was through this online forum. So I think it was really helpful at the time that scootering was at, because scootering was so small. So it was like impossible to connect with people in real life because it was so spread out.
Yeah, it literally was the only way that you could talk to people who shared your interest. If you went to the skate park, it was highly likely that you would be the only scooter rider there.
Yeah.
And you would get very heavily harassed by the local skate scene, the BMX scene. The BMX scene has always been a little bit more understanding than the skate scene, but you still got grief from everybody because what you were doing was different and you weren't doing what everybody else was doing. And so it was hard to find camaraderie if you went out to the skate park, if you had nobody to ride with, and basically nobody had anybody to ride with. So we had to start our own digital community. And it's funny because that Rolling Stone article that came out, they're basically talking about, I don't know, did you see that article, the Rolling Stone article?
Yeah, I read the whole thing, yeah. I actually, like the reporter called me a couple times for like information about it.
I don't know when that actually got released. I think it might have been like early this year, like January this year. But basically it said, the title of the article is like, scootering is the millennials' sport of choice. And basically the definition of millennial is anybody who was born like in the 1980s who essentially grew up with video games and digital technology. And so the fact that scooters are the millennial sport of choice, and the Scooter Resource was the first scooter community, and it was quite literally an internet-based digital community, like it's very fitting that everything in the history of our industry kind of evolved through the internet, because it is the millennials' sport of choice. And I'm a millennial, you're a millennial, and if I hadn't taken a web design class and learned how to use computers in high school, maybe the Scooter Resource never would have happened. But it did happen because I was exposed to a new era in technology, and that is literally what created our industry, like a digital online community.
Yeah, I can't imagine where scootering would be at right now if Scooter Resource didn't happen. I feel like it really jump-started stuff, because if all those people just continued to be the sole scooter rider in their world, like just not knowing of anybody else, they probably wouldn't have stuck with it. You can only do something for so long if it's just like, at that time it would have felt like some like novelty like Razor scooter that was never going anywhere and nobody cared about because nobody else was doing it. But I think the Scooter Resource gave people the community to actually push it forward, which was really important.
I mean, yeah, I do agree to an extent, but like I said, there were other forums before the Scooter Resource. And I think if the Scooter Resource hadn't happened, something similar probably inevitably would have happened. I don't know if it would have been successful or how it would have been. I think I would like to think that what I did or what I tried to do and what I would still like to do with Scooter Resource is more than just a forum and a message board. Up until that point, it was just message boards. But Scooter Resource, I wanted to be more than just, topics and Q&As. Like we had a home page with a news feed and photo and video contests, photo of the week, clip of the week, scooter of the month. Or we provided more interaction for people to get involved than just talking. Mm-hmm. It was much more interactive than just your typical message board. And that was intentional to try and, stimulate like a culture around our sport.
At the time, obviously, as we've mentioned, Razor was sort of the only sponsor, and Razor was and is a really large corporation, and scootering was sort of a division of it, and also the sport of scootering was new. So I feel like Razor was making improvements to the scooters, but sort of not fast enough to keep up with the demands. So at what point did you realize that you couldn't just rely on Razor? Like if something was going to happen, somebody had to do it, and that could or should be you?
I guess I just didn't want to hold my breath. I loved riding scooters. I wanted to push the limits. Every time I went to the skate park, I had to bring a backpack full of spare parts and tools, and that just to keep the scooter in one piece and able to finish a session. I mean, if you were at the skate park for 2 hours, you spent an hour changing wheels or changing your fork, changing your bars, because you would literally be breaking stuff all the time. And I just knew that, I did not want that to be my sport. I didn't want to just be wrenching on scooters at the skate park. I wanted to be able to ride them. I wanted to be able to take it out of my car, get to the skate park, ride as hard as I wanted for as long as I wanted, and not have to worry about anything breaking or failing or potentially getting injured or not having enough spare parts. I didn't see the scooter development at the time keeping up with the progression of riding. I pretty much just kind of like created a hit list in my head. Like what is the weakest component? What is the weakest link on the scooter that causes the most trouble while you're riding, is maybe the highest risk to your safety. And I just kind of like made a list of every component that I thought could be better. And I didn't know how to make a better component. I just needed to know which one I needed to learn how to make first. And ultimately that became the fork. The threaded forks were just so sketchy and dangerous and impossible to tune. And it's an extremely cheap and economical way of mass producing a scooter, which is what Razor was doing. So naturally they chose that design. But just the concept of having a threadless fork, and I used to ride BMX before I got into scooters, and I've always just been obsessed with anything with two wheels and handlebars, motorcycles, bicycles. And I knew that in BMX they had these threadless forks, and it just seemed like such a novel idea that maybe we could actually have that same technology on a scooter, and then we wouldn't have to worry about this weakest link on a scooter anymore. The whole concept of putting a threadless fork on a scooter with a vertical steering column and no offset on the stem, like on a BMX bike, the handlebars are offset from the steering column, so you have access to the top of your fork and your compression bolt, top cap, star nut, or if they have a threaded insert in the fork, like all of that is easily accessible. with a scooter, your fork tube and your handlebars were all in line. So like the idea of having a threadless fork seemed awesome, but how do you actually make that work on a scooter? And so that kind of, like, I knew that I needed to get rid of a threaded fork, but if I get rid of the threads, how am I going to keep the headset tight? How am I going to keep everything dialed? And that kind of became my mission, to figure out how to make that work, how to keep a scooter together without threads on the fork. And that was kind of what forced me to learn about metal fabrication, about welding and machining, and just everything that I needed to learn how to make this product to even see if it was going to work. I had to kind of self-teach myself. I don't want to say I self-taught myself. I definitely had help from friends who knew about metal fabrication, but ultimately I was kind of directing myself to learn different things as I needed to know them to be able to come up with, the initial concept was the ICS. And actually ICS wasn't even called ICS in the beginning. It was just called the Threadless Compression System. Like that was the first compression system for a scooter. And so I didn't have to call it anything specific because there wasn't any other compression system on the market. It was the only one, so it was the threadless compression system. And then later when SCS came out, then the original threadless compression system was no longer the only one in the market. So we had to kind of differentiate it somehow so people actually could, use a term that we knew what we were talking about. And so with SCS, that became the standard compression system, and the original threadless compression system, because it had a giant bolt and the bolt was upside down going through the bottom of your fork, it was inverted. So that became ICS, inverted compression system. But that name didn't actually come about until after SCS came out. So it's kind of funny that ICS didn't actually get its name until there were more compression systems on the market.
I always wondered, since you made the threadless fork, and like you said, the Razor forks were almost unrideable. They were so dangerous and broke all the time. You basically made a product that had no competition and that people basically literally needed to ride a scooter. Like, you almost couldn't ride a scooter without this threadless fork because you would break the fork so much. So I know that obviously the participation in scootering was pretty low because it was in the early days, but were you getting tons of orders for those forks?
I think maybe as a ratio to, sales compared to active participants in the freestyle scooter industry, maybe I was getting a lot of sales. But ultimately the original SR forks, I probably produced less than 300 of them. And it was actually kind of like a funny story that nobody knows. I'll tell you because this is the time to tell it, I suppose. But I really, when I started making those forks, I really didn't, I had just gotten my feet wet welding, and I really didn't know much machining at the time. And if you look at one of those original Scooter Resource forks, it's got, either laser cut or stamped plates on it and machined crown race seats. And so I didn't know how to make any of that stuff at the time. And this was probably about 2004, I guess. So this is kind of after the initial scooter boom kind of tapered off. And so there were companies who attempted to make these aftermarket components to try and capitalize on the first big scooter boom, but they were just making fancy threaded forks and, just basically misguided components. They thought that's what people needed, but really it was still totally off the mark. And so by about 2004, there's a lot of people who had a lot of random scooter stuff that they didn't want anymore and couldn't get rid of. And so I actually found a guy on eBay who was selling 300 suspension forks, threaded suspension forks. He sold them to me for $40. I think, I don't know what the math is, but I think it's like 13 cents a piece. So effectively, like, I was able to purchase the pieces of the fork that I didn't know how to make yet. The way I was looking at it, I was able to purchase 300 sets of dropouts and 300 crown races and 300, top plates for the fork legs. And so I wasn't really trying to buy the suspension forks. I was trying to obtain specific features on the fork that I didn't have the resources to make yet. And I mean, for 13 cents, and I was like, I don't know, I was like 18 at the time. It was like, okay, I definitely have $40 and I don't know how to make this stuff. So this is like the best deal in the world.
Yeah.
And so I bought that stuff, and then that was the original SR forks. We literally had like a scooter chop shop. We unbolted all the suspension, basically threw out, well, we didn't throw them out. I literally had like cases of springs in my in the original little workshop. Like, I mean, hundreds of springs and hundreds of, all these like little like nuts and bolts components that we were just stripping off of these forks. And then we cut the threads off the fork tube, re-welded them with 1.1/8" threadless tubing. So we converted the steerer tube to threadless, and then we took little pieces of like 7/8 tubing, which is the same size as a crossbar for a handlebar, and we used that size tubing to replace the spring suspension on the legs and welded it all solid. And that's literally why the original SR fork has the 2 tube legs, because we used little pieces of handlebar tubing welded on to replace the springs, and then replace the threads on the fork with a threadless tube, and that became the first threadless fork.
Wow, that's so crazy. Yeah, I remember when people took those suspension forks and they just replaced the springs with like solid bolts to make them rigid.
Yeah, there was like a ton of inspiration that I got from the Scooter Mod Super Bible on Scooter Resource. I mean, it was like if you wanted to ride scooters at that time, you had to read the Scooter Mod Super Bible, and it was basically every possible modification to increase the strength, durability, longevity, performance of a scooter. And yeah, people were bolting bolting suspension forks, and that was doing pretty good. And so when I saw an opportunity to buy a bunch of suspension forks, I wasn't like, oh, we don't need suspension forks in the industry. Like, I'm not going to waste my time with that. I just like immediately thought, oh, well, people are having success modding suspension forks. Maybe I could do a really, really good job intentionally, not just bolting them, but like actually modifying them, welding, fabrication, and really, really make these things nice. And maybe people would be super into that, and they were pretty into it.
So you made forks and bars under like the Scooter Resource name. Did you make any other parts under that name? I'm trying to think.
So when I first opened the Scooter Resource store, that was like in 2006, and I was selling yak wheels, because at the time those were like the best wheels you could get until the micro metal core came along. But those were really expensive and really hard to find. So yak pretty much like was the standard for a few years. So I was selling those, and I was selling just the original black and gold Scooter Resource t-shirt. And then I guess the threadless fork, the SR fork, the original compression system, which later we call ICS. I was selling both of those things through Scooter Resource. I was also selling the Scooter Resource buff bars, and buff. That's I guess just kind of a nickname that I was given. So anything that you see that says Buff on it, that's actually talking about me, like our wheels now, Buff Core Technology, Buff Bars. Like that's kind of sort of my low-key signature on my products. I guess like the last thing that was developed under Scooter Resource, it was called the SR Team Bar. It never actually was released. It never came out as a Scooter Resource product. It actually became the first handlebar that was released under Proto, and that was the Slayer bar. So when I initially debuted that design, and that was like the first handlebar that didn't have like a connected steering column to the crossbar. So that was like at the time pretty significant because everybody else was basically either just welding a T-bar or putting gussets on a T-bar. The Slayer bar was the first bar to actually be like a Y shape. It's the first Y shape bar. It was developed as a Scooter Resource product, but ultimately it was released as a Proto product.
And what was the motivation to start the brand Proto? Like, because, I mean, you could have just continued making parts under Scooter Resource. So did you feel like you had to separate that as a forum and then start a separate parts company?
That was a tough decision, to be honest. And I still think about that a lot. Like, what if I had just continued focusing all of my efforts on Scooter Resource and the Scooter Resource store and Scooter Resource parts, and I think, you know, if I had done that and if I had dedicated everything to Scooter Resource, Scooter Resource could probably be like a super giant in the industry today. But I really strongly felt that the scooter industry needed an unbiased community, and there was a lot of pushback against what I was doing with Scooter Resource because I owned the community, or I owned the platform for the community. It's impossible to own the community, but you can own the platform that it exists on. And I did, and I owned the Scooter Resource store, and now the Scooter Resource store was manufacturing its own components and selling them to the community. And I think that there was kind of like this idea that I was monopolizing the industry, so to speak. And that didn't really sit well with me because that definitely wasn't what I was trying to do. I was just trying to like literally build a community build the community and build an industry for the sport that I loved. And I just wanted to help facilitate other people who loved it as much as me to enjoy it the most that they could by supplying them with the best possible parts to ride. I guess I just like wanted to make a statement that, you know, like I'm not trying to control the industry. Like if Scooter Resource having a store and Scooter Resource manufacturing components is going to be such a conflict of interest, like me against the rest of the developing community, then I will bow out just to prove that that's not what I'm trying to do. That's what Proto was. I mean, Proto was a rebranding of Scooter Resource parts, SR parts. So all of the components shifted from SR to Proto. And then I guess even at that, the fact that SR still had a store was still slightly a conflict of interest because that was probably around, Proto was released in December 1st of 2008. Proto was effectively like the first freestyle scooter company, and it was still being sold through the SR store, but the SR store was now in conflict with the developing retail dealer network as the industry was growing. And so I kind of had to take it one step further and shut down the SR store, and eventually that was rebranded into Freestyle Depot. So Scooter Resource kind of got torn apart and got turned into a retail store, a scooter component brand, and then what what remained was just the message board and the community. And it did become truly unbiased by that point. Like, it was just a community with nothing else except people talking about the industry that they loved.
I was wondering, at what point did you think about filing for patents on the SCS, and how was that process, and how long did it take, and what was the feeling when it actually came through and you received the patent?
I guess my gut told me that threadless forks had to be the future. Like, there just wasn't an option. Like, we had to go threadless for the sport to continue progressing. And so the initial compression system was the ICS, and it was just like my best attempt at making something work at the time. But I was never satisfied with that design. Like, it worked, but it didn't work the way I wanted a compression system to work. I didn't even know what we needed or how the best way for a compression system to work was, but that was like my best attempt at doing something to allow us to move into the future, you know, with threadless technology. And I just wasn't satisfied with it. I was never satisfied with ICS. It worked, but it didn't work the way that I wanted it to work. And so I just kept on tinkering and experimenting. And I guess ultimately it was like, you have to take your front wheel off. You have to tighten this big, long bolt. If your bars or fork turn at all, maybe your headset gets too tight or maybe it gets too loose, and just everything about the installation and the maintenance on ICS was a total headache, but it allowed us to move into the threadless realm, which was the goal. But I just knew there had to be something better, and I knew that if I could really figure out what that solution was, then the sport could really, really like take off. And so it took me another, I don't know, I think the original ICS I probably developed, I think the first time I ever like rode it in public was at the Thrill Zone competition up in Washington. That was the first threadless fork, first compression system, the original ICS. And that was like maybe early 2005. I think I probably had the idea in 2004, but 2005 I actually had like a working prototype. And then in 2007, probably like early in 2007 is when I had like the initial idea and concept for the SCS. That got prototyped in 2007, and then I rode it all of 2008, and then we debuted it on Valentine's Day, actually, 2009. That was like my big debut, the gift to the industry, and that was like my first studio video. This was like 2 or 3 months after Proto was born. I released this SCS video that's still out there on the internet. It was like the culmination of like, you know, like 5 years worth of tinkering and prototyping and just testing these ideas and testing these concepts to see if they would work. And I knew that if this worked and if I got it right, this could change the industry. And I didn't want to just, you know, give that away. And so my grandfather was kind of like a restless inventor type person. He dropped out of school in like the 6th grade and just taught himself everything he needed to know, started a big like synthetic marble countertop manufacturing plant back in the 70s. And he was a mold maker and a tooling designer, and he ended up filing for some patents when he was younger. And so he was kind of the inspiration, you know, like if you have a good idea, protect it. Like make sure people know that you're the one that came up with that. And so that was kind of the inspiration for filing for the patent. I filed for it that February of 2009, I believe. And I filed for it right before I released the video. It actually did not get granted for another 4 years. So patent and trademarks in the United States take a long time. Like the soonest you're going to hear a response after you file a patent is 2 years. And it's pretty much like a 99.9% guarantee that your first response is going to be a rejection. And then you have to go and look at what the examiner says and why did it get rejected. And they usually cite a bunch of other patents saying, well, your idea is similar to this one and might also be similar to this one. And then you have to respond and you have to say, no, mine is distinctly different because of this. Or maybe maybe they cite something that actually does invalidate your patent. And so you have to basically evaluate, what are they saying and how can I differentiate my idea and my concept to prove that it is an original idea. And so that back and forth process, I didn't get my initial response for 2 years, and then it spent another 2 years going back and forth. And each one of those rounds of evaluation, is 3 to 6 months from the time you respond and then they respond back and then you respond again and then they respond back. And so it took about 4 years to get that one granted, and ended up filing a continuation application on the SCS. So I actually have 2 patents on the SCS now, just for different features that we had to be selective about what to include on the first filing, and then we continued pursuing some of the other claims in an additional filing, and then filed a couple more patents. I have other patents granted also for the TDI deck design, and I've got a few more patents that are pending currently right now that are going back and forth in review. I was taught and instilled, or had the idea instilled in me that you need to protect your ideas. Like your intellectual property is extremely important, and it's what proves, who the true innovators in an industry are. If I didn't have an SCS patent, it would just be my word against the rest of the industry that's using my design. Like, I came up with that first. Okay, prove it. Well, I actually can prove it. It was my design and the entire industry uses it. I guess it was kind of like my gift to the industry of sorts. I called it the standard for a reason, because I really believe that it had the ability to standardize scooter construction, and it did standardize scooter construction. Yeah, I can always say that I did it first.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about, so obviously, like you said, it's called the standard compression system, and I know with a lot of products you design, you're trying to create industry standards. So I was just wondering what your philosophy was on the importance of having industry standards.
The way I've always looked at what I do compared to what other scooter companies do, other scooter companies design scooter parts. I do not believe that I design scooter parts. I believe that I design systems and methods of compatibility. And that has always been my goal since the beginning of my foray into component design, and everything that I have slated to be released in the future. Those are all attempts at standardizing the way we assemble a scooter. And I guess the comparison that I always draw, because it's just the simplest to understand, is every single skateboard truck in the world can bolt to every single skateboard in the world because it uses the same 4-hole pattern. That is a standard. If somebody came out with a truck that had 3 holes, or the 4-hole spacing was a 1/4 inch off, trucks would not work. Certain trucks wouldn't work with certain boards. And that's literally the scooter industry right now. Everybody is using different dimensions, different component compatibilities. I mean, I think there's 5, 6, 7, probably 10 different compression systems now that are, some of them are extremely proprietary and only work with very specific components. The total opposite idea of standardizing construction. Like, these companies are designing stuff intentionally that only work with their components. So when somebody buys these scooters or buys these parts, they have to continue buying from that company to continue getting pieces that work with this assembly. And I guess, like, from a business standpoint, if you don't care about the health of the industry and the community and the sport, and you just want to guarantee future sales, yeah, maybe it is smart to lock people into these proprietary designs. But if you actually care about the industry and you want every kid from every corner of the globe to be able to get a part and bolt it on their scooter and go ride and have fun, you have to have standards.
It's the same in like the bicycle industry, or like you said, in the skate industry. It's just confusing why the scooter industry hasn't followed yet.
The biggest reason the scooter industry hasn't followed is because 90% of the owners and designers of these companies don't know anything about scooter riding. They don't know anything about geometry or compatibility, or they don't care about compatibility. Like, they're just the people influencing the designs at basically every other scooter company are not scooter riders. Maybe more so now that there's an older generation of scooter riders kind of growing up and getting more involved in the business side. There's probably like a little bit better influence, but for many, many years, basically every scooter company's concept was find a factory in China that makes OEM scooter components, paint it some crazy color scheme, put a nice graphic on it, and tell people it's high performance. But there was no analysis of geometry and performance and how something locks into a grind, or, you know, head tube angles, or like just contact points when you're grinding, or how a scooter was balanced. Like, nobody ever took any of those things into consideration. They just basically said, you know, if it's an L shape with two wheels and handlebars and it looks nice, that's a performance scooter. And that just is not the case at all.
So going from the sort of like parts philosophy of Proto to the team, the people of Proto, what was it like assembling a team when you started Proto? What were your motivations, and who did you have in mind? Like, some people that didn't make it to the team or something like that.
The initial Proto team was just a transition from Scooter Resource. So the first team that I actually sponsored, my pro team, was Anthony Bustos, Tuan, Brandon Kilbury, and Brian Murphy. Those are my first three pro riders, and they were specifically chosen because they were the only three riders who in 2007 podiumed at some of the biggest competitions in the industry and were currently unsponsored. So Tuan podiumed at SD, Brandon podiumed at the Incline Club, and Brian Murphy podiumed at Extreme Wheels. And they were the only three unsponsored guys that were riding at that level who were basically available to be sponsored. And so I picked them up as my first pro team, and then maybe about 6 months later I decided that I wanted to kind of find, you know, who the next generation was, like who's going to be the up and coming riders, you know, the AM team. I think you were the first. You were the first on the AM team.
Yeah.
And then we got Alex Stedman and Elmer Ferreres. So that was the Scooter Resource AM team. Probably less than 6 months after that, Proto was launched, and then the Scooter Resource Pro team and Scooter Resource AM team just kind of merged forces and became the first Proto team. And then after that, we added a few more people. I think we added 5 more after that over the course of the next 2 years while we were filming for Catalyst. But the first half of the Proto team was actually from Scooter Resource.
And I think still to this day, what always strikes me about Proto is, I mean, I'll be on trips with people a lot with like sometimes with Tilt, or sometimes I'll just be with like friends or something, and like everybody is at a spot, and it's kind of just like, like, okay, who's gonna backlip this handrail, or like everybody can do it. But with the original Proto team, everybody's riding was so incredibly diverse, and just like them as like people were so diverse that we could all be at the same spot, and it's like every trick that one person would do, nobody else could do it, because everybody's riding was so unique. And I always thought that was great about like the original Catalyst crew. And I was just wondering if that, like, how did you sort of hand pick these like very interesting like personalities and riding styles?
I've always valued creativity and originality, so I wanted a very eclectic team. And since Proto was the first real freestyle scooter company, and this was the first real freestyle scooter team, and we were filming for the first real freestyle scooter video, I didn't just want a bunch of riders all doing the same tricks. I wanted it to showcase all of the potential that scooters had to offer. I mean, if you go down that lineup, Tuan never actually made it into Catalyst, but he was at the time an amazing park rider. What I brought to the table, I was always just a go big or go home mentality. I've never really been a tech rider. I just like to go fast, drop off things, fly through the air, like just that full speed kind of. I was obsessed with motocross when I was a kid. So like I just picture myself on a dirt bike when I'm riding a scooter is the best way to put it. And then you had Alex Stedman, who was just insanely smooth with just the most incredible balance and style. And then you had, Brandon Kilbury, who could ride big ramps and also do some insane park tricks in the street and was just kind of like a combo king. And then Brian Murphy was just a full maniac hucker. And Dan Barrett was just ultra technical. And then you had John Reyes, who was kind of like a cross between Dan Barrett and Alex Stedman. Incredible balance, but also highly technical rider. And Steven Sanchez was definitely like more of like a park influence in the streets, but like just honestly some of the best style ever. He was probably one of the most naturally gifted people. He could skate, ride bikes, just anything he tried to do, he was good at. And then there was Chema. Chema just came out of total left field, and he was just so incredibly different. Like he was basically building his own scooters out of the trash in Mexico, making his own weird components that he thought, would help his riding. And I mean, it did help his riding, and it also helped his riding look totally unique. And he was one of the first people in the industry to really push the whole concept of grinding on pegs. He was one of the first people doing that stuff. And then there was you, of course, just absolutely flawless execution of anything you tried to do. I mean, I think you're probably the definition of a perfectionist when it comes to riding, and just your bag of tricks and your ability to look at obstacles in the streets so differently than most people did. I don't know. Did I miss anybody?
Elmer
is, yeah, he was amazing. He had like some of the best style ever, and it was just that raw, grimy street hucking. I don't know if I would expect to ever see anybody ride like that dude ever again. Like he was so unique. And just his whole background. I mean, I've been talking about like the way these people rode, but their personalities were equally as eclectic as the riding was. I mean, we all came from different walks of life, scattered across the country. We all have different family backgrounds and values and stories, but that's what made the Catalyst team so interesting.
Yeah, it was like a motley crew.
Yeah, like literally everything about all of us was totally different, and that's what I loved about it. It really was a showcase of everything that the sport at that time had to offer.
It was so cool to just go on trips with those people because like you said, all their different like family and cultural backgrounds, it just really like expanded my worldview. And I would have like in real life, like if somebody's not a scooter rider, they're not gonna just somehow have this like group of friends that they spend a lot of time with from all over the country.
I love where I'm from, but if it wasn't for the scooter industry, I probably would not know much about the world outside of my hometown.
Yeah.
Like I can thank being involved in the scooter community for exposing me to quite literally everything that I have seen since I've turned 18. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've traveled to many different countries, met many different people, experienced many different cultures, and it would not have happened, or at least not happened in the same way, if it wasn't for my involvement in the scooter industry. So I definitely like very grateful that I had and still continue to have that opportunity to know so many different people from so many different cultures, from so many places all around the globe. And I like just the idea that I can pretty much travel to any country and reach out to somebody and be welcomed it's like a surreal feeling.
What was the process like of getting Chema into America once you decided that you wanted to sponsor him?
So for anybody listening that doesn't know this, Mexico and the United States historically have had a pretty bad relationship. So if you're a Mexican trying to come to the United States and trying to do it legally, it's pretty difficult. And he spent, I don't know, it was like something like 3 years. I mean, from the time he sent his sponsor tape in, which by the way is still one of the best all-time videos. Like, talk about a rider who just totally appeared out of nowhere and blew everybody's minds. Like, Chema's sponsor video is still, as far as I'm concerned, like, it is one of the most insane and impressive videos to ever happen in scooters. And the fact that it happened totally outside of the entire scooter community and he didn't know that anyone else was riding when he filmed it is just unbelievable. But back to the I guess immigration topic or travel topic. Took him about 3 years to get all of his paperwork together after we officially sponsored him. When we got that video, it was just like, oh my God, like, you have to ride for Proto. Like, you're exactly what I'm looking for. Like, you're so different. Like, in every aspect, your writing, your culture, your language, you're so different. Like, you represent like a part of the sport that no one even knew was a thing. And so it was like, naturally he had to be on Proto. You know, it wasn't an option. And fortunately, he wanted to be on Proto really badly, and it just totally worked out. So he filed all of his paperwork, but I mean, to actually be granted a travel visa, you have to have money in your bank, because if you have no money and you're asking to come to the United States looks at that and says, well, how are you going to survive once you get to the United States if you don't have any money? And so they'll just block your visa request because they don't want people who can't survive coming here and leeching off of the system. And so it took Chema a little while, you know, to build up a little personal finance to show that he could visit the United States and could pay his own way. And then eventually he was granted a visa. Currently, though, his visa I think it's like a B1, B2. So it's like a travel visa and he can, you know, come and have business meetings, but he's not allowed to, you know, actually live here and stay here and work here and have a normal life here. Like, he's only allowed to come for trips or on vacation, and then eventually he has to go back to Mexico. I think with a B1, B2 visa, you get about 6 months a year to be in the States. So you can split your time 50-50. You can spend half your time here, half your time there.
Chema obviously got on the team and he started filming for Catalyst. And when all of us started filming for Catalyst, I was wondering if you felt like it was going to have the impact that it did. Did you see that in the future?
I did. Yeah, I totally did. Because I'm still very proud of all of the riders who were in Catalyst, and I'm proud of the team that I assembled for that video. There wasn't any other real scooter company or sponsor doing what we were doing, so I basically had my hand pick of the best in the industry, and the Catalyst team at that time was the best in the industry. I got to hand pick a dream team. Nobody in the sport today can do that because everybody has, obligations with their existing sponsors. But back then, filming for the Proto video was the biggest and best opportunity that any of us had. And so I got the best riders in the sport filming for that video, and we all shared the same goal of putting out a real full length, and I knew the talent that was on that team, and I knew that when people saw that video, it was going to change the game. And that's literally why the video is called Catalyst. I really thought that it had the potential to be the catalyst and really kind of set the industry on fire, it had the potential, if it was done right, to change the way people looked at scooter riding. And change the way that people look at scooter riding, but also influence people to push in every different direction and every different style. And it was showcasing, so many different styles and abilities. It had, I knew that it could influence every different type of riding in the industry. And so it wasn't just a catalyst for scooters, it was a catalyst for all the different styles that people now pursue, whether it's going big or being a technical rider or just focusing on the flowy park style. I knew that the team that I had assembled was the best at everything and could really influence riders who looked up to those different styles and those tricks to really push their own limits in those directions.
And I think it was at the right time too, because if I remember how scootering was back then, it was kind of everybody just kind of rode everything, and there wasn't really divisions and sort of terrain. I don't know if it would have really excelled like it did without some sort of direction or guiding force like Catalyst was, because I think that video really inspired people to go in a certain direction, actually film videos and ride street if that's what they were into. And I think it was just important to inspire people. It's just crazy to hear, I don't know, over the years, people will still just mention Catalyst, yeah, when I was a kid, that really inspired me. And I don't know, it's just cool to still hear it, what would it be, 7-8 years later.
The whole argument or division between street versus park is such a silly argument to me, because the Catalyst team, we literally rode everything. If we were at a park, we could ride and film and have fun together. If we were in the streets, we could ride and film and have fun together. Brandon Kilbury is one of the oldest, best park riders, and in Catalyst he filmed a full street part. He did a little bit of everything. He's one of the most well-rounded scooter riders ever. And I think when it comes down to filming a video, you can love to ride park, you can love to ride street, but there is a side of me that does appreciate filming in the streets a little bit more than filming in the park, just because not to say that skate park riding is any less than street riding, but from like an aesthetic point of view, just seeing the same gray quarter pipe over and over and over again just visually gets a little bit boring. Not the tricks, but just the visual aesthetic of the footage itself can get a little repetitive and redundant. But when you're filming in the street, every spot looks different. The landscapes, the scenery, the actual spot itself, I mean, they're not perfect. The ledges don't have coping. They're chunky. Maybe they're waxed, maybe they're not waxed. Maybe it's just straight up like concrete gravel that you're riding on. It's not smooth, perfect skate park terrain. So actually, like if I'm going to film, I would much rather film in the street just because of the variety that it provides the viewer when they're watching the video.
When you were filming your part for Catalyst, I was just wondering if you could think of any stories, or also just in general filming for Catalyst, like while other filming was going on for other people's parts, just like a couple sort of memorable moments that you could think of.
I guess probably the most memorable trip I would say that I took for Catalyst was like right at the very end of filming. I think it was like, because Catalyst came out in like early December. And I think that the last filming trip that we did was in New York, because at the time, like half of the Proto team, the Catalyst team, was in or around New York, and you were fairly East Coast. Brandon was fairly East Coast. Well, I mean, fully East Coast. I think I actually took like 2 or 3 trips right at the end, and it was those trips were specifically to film Super 8 like film footage, like real film. And so I took a trip out to Arizona with Alex Stedman, like I think that was in like October or November, to get Super 8 footage of me and him. And because I wanted to get Super 8 footage of everybody on the team to use to edit into their parts, and just like the B-roll lifestyle, intro, credits, that type of stuff. And I just really liked that Super 8 aesthetic, and so I wanted to make sure that I had enough footage of all the riders on the team. So that last trip to New York, I think it was like right before Thanksgiving. I think for Catalyst, I shot 12 rolls, 12 3-minute rolls. So I had like 36 minutes of Super 8 footage for that film. But I think like 8 of those I shot in 1 week in New York on that last trip. And I basically, like, by that point, I already had Catalyst, like, I would say 80 or 85% roughed out on the timeline when I was editing. And so I already had, like, blank spaces in everybody's video parts that were, like, placeholders. And I knew, you know, I wanted to get a face shot. I wanted to get just them laughing, or them, you know, like, glaring at the camera, you know, or, like, just like, things that I thought would match what I had already seen on the timeline with the song selection and the footage that surrounded these placeholders. Like I had an idea of, you know, what I wanted to see in those sections. And so I literally had like a 5-page shot list, and I just and it was organized by each person's name. Like for John Reyes's part, I need to get these clips, and for Elmer's part, he needs a clip like this and a clip like this to go in these empty spaces. And so it was just like a week-long filming trip with everybody out there, and I just had the Super 8 pretty much out almost the entire time, just like checking shots off the list. And that's like all the shots that you see in Catalyst. Mm-hmm. So that was a pretty cool trip. It was different. It was a way different trip than like our typical filming trip, because the typical filming trips, it was like we got the backpack with the VXs and the depth lens, and we're going to all these spots, and we're, you know, filming all these tricks and getting the clips and all that. But that trip was, I mean, we did go to spots, and there was actually quite a few like enders that got filmed on that trip. Brandon Kilbury filmed his 180 triple to fakie down that set on that trip. I did the gap to grind at LES, which was not my ender, but that was something that I've been wanting to do for years, and we filmed that with Super 8. So like there was a lot of heavy riding that went down that we were fortunate enough to capture on Super 8. But it was also just like there was just like such a cool vibe on that trip, because we all knew it was the final trip before the film was going to be complete, and it was just kind of about like enjoying that last like time together. And just like a lot of the Super 8 stuff that I was shooting was just kind of like lifestyle. It was like the camaraderie of the team and capturing the moments together. And I don't know, that was a pretty special trip.
And what about stories? Can you think of any specific tricks that were in your Catalyst part? Some stories behind any of them?
Most of the stuff towards the end of my Catalyst part, I guess. I mean, obviously, the closer to the end you get, the gnarlier the riding gets. Or I guess that's supposed to be how it goes. So, I mean, most of the stuff towards the end of my Catalyst part are the most memorable things for me. I mean, my enders were the Nitro Circus Mega Ramp. Like, I was the first rider to ride anything like that. Like, I toured with Nitro Circus for 2 years, and I was able to do, you know, the biggest, longest, highest flips and Supermans and cliffhangers and just like all, like, I mean, going back to picturing myself riding a dirt bike, like, it was like a dream come true. Like, I literally felt like I was riding a dirt bike on a scooter. And so, I mean, those last few clips are kind of like, I guess, career highlights for me. Just the fact that I got to do that when I did, and those are pretty memorable. I would say, though, that like probably, I mean, the Nitro stuff is really awesome for me and memorable for me, but probably the thing that was the most terrified about, and like still to this day, probably like maybe my favorite thing that I've ever filmed, is the nose blunt drop off the Encinitas Nudge.
Yeah.
Like the big like signpost that's just on that crazy like volcano bank. And I went there probably once a year for 5 years. And I think the first time I went, I was on like a bolted B model Razor with plastic wheels and bolted bars, and probably still had a threaded fork at that time, which is like makes me shiver thinking about trying that with a threaded fork. But I think I rolled down, like halfway down, like ran up the bank and dropped in like halfway. And I was just like, oh man, like if I actually try this, like my chances of survival are pretty low on this scooter. Like I need to go back to the drawing board, do some more modifications on this scooter. I'll come back next year. And so I think the next year, maybe I had a reinforced threaded fork and a welded suspension fork, or welded suspension or bolted suspension legs. And, I might have had like a metal core wheel then, but it was still like bolted bars and bolted deck. And I'm like, okay, you know what? This still isn't going to work. Like I cannot attempt something like this on this scooter. And so I just like kept coming back like year after year, standing on top of that sign, looking at it, rolling in halfway down the bank. And then I think maybe by like the third or fourth year, I was actually like rolling in from the top of the bank with like a pretty decent scooter. I think like I had one of the original Phoenix one-piece deck prototypes. And then of course, like the original one-piece decks were the Scooter Resource. Oh, that was one thing that we didn't talk about, actually. I did make one-piece decks. I did make one-piece decks through Scooter Resource, but they never went into production, and they never got released. But yeah, those were the first one-piece decks technically ever made. And I broke both of them and realized that one-piece decks aren't the future. And that's totally my opinion, and time will tell. So not everybody has to agree with that sentiment, but in 2006, I broke one-piece decks, and it changed my mind about one-piece decks. So, but yeah, I went there like year after year with a different scooter each time, slowly modifying them, slowly reinforcing them and building them up. And then the day that I finally did the nose blunt drop, I was on a 6-inch wide, 22-inch long mega ramp scooter that I had ridden on tour with Nitro. So I had just finished touring with Nitro Circus, riding a mega ramp roll in, and I'm just like, okay, like I feel comfortable on massive tranny. This is massive tranny. It's kind of sketchy. It's kind of like a cheese grater. It's in the streets. I'm going to be rolling full speed through an intersection, and I have to time it with the traffic lights, you know, but I'm pretty sure that the scooter is strong enough to do this now. And I'm pretty sure the geometry is good enough and the dimensions are good enough for me to maintain control and get through the intersection without I don't know, doing something that I didn't want to think about.
I actually remember I was either staying at your house or staying at the shop the day you did it. And I remember because you basically woke me up because you had to go there so early in the morning, so there was no traffic. And I remember you waking me up at, I don't know, like 9 or 10 or something. Well, I just remember you saying, like, I did it. I got the Civic Center sign, and I didn't even know you were going that day.
Oh, yeah, we left at like 5 a.m. or something. It was like 5 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Like, I did it like right at sunrise, basically.
Yeah.
Or I think I might have actually done it before the sun came up. I think I actually like rode away from it like around 6:30. Sun probably came up at like 7 or something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I tried to go on a Sunday morning. You know, people sleep in. There's not a lot of people on the road, and so I just tried to time it with the least amount of traffic on the road, and I had already been there like on different days at different times, you know, like trying to like visualize when the best time of day and on what day would be ideal to try it. And it just, like, after I watched the way the traffic flowed around there on different days and different times, I just decided, you know, like Sunday morning I'm going to church and I'm sending it.
I know you had like a kind of a crazy process when you were filming for Armageddon. Like, there would be long stretches of time where you wouldn't ride a scooter at all, and then you'd just have like these intense periods where you would like go on a trip and just sort of film almost your entire part. Like, you went on that trip to San Francisco and probably filmed half your part there.
Yeah, and then I think the other half of my part was filmed in Guadalajara.
Oh yeah.
I think I filmed like my entire Armageddon part was filmed in 2 trips. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was like, so I mean, when we were filming for that was 2012. So that's like 2 years later after Catalyst, and by that point, you know, Proto was now 4 years old, and the industry by 2012 was like actually starting to boom, and demand for Proto products was high, and my role started shifting, you know, from, you know, just a kid riding and playing to like actually being responsible for managing a real company and managing production and overseeing, like, quite literally a scooter factory. And that became very, very, very demanding on my time, and still is. I mean, that's still where I'm at today. It's only, I mean, my responsibilities have only continued to increase since that time. So Armageddon was definitely, I mean, that was kind of like my last hurrah as a scooter rider, sort of. Well, as a scooter rider, the way that I had been up until that point. Mm-hmm. You know, just being able to focus on my riding and having fun, like that has since kind of taken the back seat to my business responsibilities. But Armageddon was an interesting period of time, just because I was doing my best to stay in shape and, you know, stay ready to ride when I had the time to go ride. But when I was home, it was pretty much exclusively focused on business, and the only time that I actually got to get on the scooter and get the cameras out and get clips was if I forced myself to leave and go on a trip. So that's why. And then when I was there, it was like, okay, like, I have a week on this trip to do and film as much as I possibly can. Like, I have to push it. if I'm going to have a video part. And so that's why that San Francisco trip was super productive. That Mexico trip was super productive. And then I just had that burning desire to film my ender on my little baby mega ramp that I had at my parents' house for all those years. I really, really wanted to get something gnarly on that. And so I pretty much filmed each half of my part on 2 different trips and then filmed my ender at my parents' house.
And what I know that was a really intense process. Like I've seen the raw video of that. So walk us through that process. Well, what did you have to do? I know you like rented a crane and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I guess the original idea, I mean, the reason why I built that ramp was because I wanted to be the first person on a scooter to do a double backflip. That is like still probably like one of, I don't know if it's a regret, but it's just something that still bums me out when I look back on it, because I never actually did roll away from a double flip on that ramp. And the ramp's gone now, so it's not like I can, go try again. But I had to kind of compromise. I'm like, okay, if I don't feel comfortable double backflipping this, then what can I do on here? It wasn't that I didn't feel comfortable double backflipping it. I just really I just wanted to try something different and I don't know, maybe I really I've always kind of said, the perfect spot, it has to be skinny, it has to be sketchy, and it has to be steep, like the triple S's, skinny, sketchy, steep. And my ramp was skinny, it was sketchy, and it was steep. And so I just tried to, think what is the gnarliest thing that I could do on this setup? And I think by that time, Terry had already double flipped. So it was do I really, I'm not going to be able to be the first person anymore. So should I even risk sending a double flip on this, or should I get more creative with the setup? And so Josh Young was living out here at the time, and I was kind of bouncing some ideas around with him, and he was down to help me, start construction on a second roll-in on top of the roof. And so for, I don't know, a week or 2 before I filmed the ender, we went and I bought all new masonite. We sealed all the new masonite and relayered the whole ramp so it looked like it was brand new. And then we used all the old masonite and all the old wood and 2x4s that we had stripped off the ramp when we were fixing it up. We used that to build an even smaller, steeper, sketchier miniature roll-in on top of the other roll-in. I mean, that's the ender that you see, the mini roll-in to mini knee-high kicker backflip into the big roll-in to front flip over the stretch gap. Because the original setup was only a 4 foot 4 foot long box jump, but I didn't want to do a 4 foot long front flip. I had just finished touring with Nitro doing 50 foot front flips.
Yeah.
So I wanted to stretch the box as far as I could. I think we pulled it out 12 feet, which for that setup, for what it was, that was a pretty long 12 foot front flip or 15 feet maybe. 'Cause I think I landed maybe halfway down the landing, but yeah, it was, I just wanted to be able to get the most out of that ramp. And yeah, so when it actually came time to film for it, and that's that, I don't remember what the video is called, Baby Mega B-Sides or Mini Mega B-Sides or something. It's 30 minutes of me crashing. Yeah, I spent 4 days, rented a boom lift, basically a big crane lift to get that bird's eye view, because there was the setup was so big and so tall that if you filmed it from the roof, you weren't seeing the second box, and if you filmed it from the ground, you weren't seeing the first box. So the only way to really actually be able to film the whole thing in one shot was to get that bird's eye view. So I rented that boom lift for I think we had it for 5 days, and then I bought those 3 big crash pads just because I really, really, really needed to feel comfortable on that back flip in before hucking a front flip or even like making it to the lip to huck the front flip. Like, I needed that confidence boost because it was extremely skinny, sketchy, and steep and terrifying. Took a little while to warm up to that. I think it was like one full day just throwing it to crash pads, and then like 3 days of like slowly pushing the crash pads, you know, farther down, and then having them on the lander. And it wasn't just one day I decided to send it. Like, it was a slow build up to that final clip. And I mean, that's all documented in that B-sides video, but yeah, it was a pretty long and grueling process, and I was like literally black and blue by the time it was finished. I mean, black eye, my whole leg was purple from clipping the plywood on one of those crashes. We had a sheet of plywood like holding back the palm tree, and my legs went off the side of the ramp, and I fell like 12 feet to my thigh on the edge of a sheet of plywood, and that felt pretty fantastic.
Yeah, I remember the clip was just such a surprise too, because your whole part is just street, and then it just cuts to you like fully padded rolling into this like sketchy roll, and the way it's like it's super zoomed in too, so at first you can't even really tell like what you're about to ride, and it just catches you so off guard. I just remember seeing it for the first time. It was so crazy. I don't think I even knew that you did it. I want to say, like, I saw it for the first time at the premiere.
Because that didn't happen on a filming trip, that was just like kind of like my own personal project that I was working on. I don't think I didn't really tell people. Like, I kind of wanted it. Like, I had this crazy idea. I think the thing was I just didn't really like want to call something out and then not get it.
Yeah.
like either get broke off or not be able to land it. So I didn't really tell people that I wanted to do that, or that I was doing that, or that I was going to try it. Like, I kind of did it in secret, and then just I figured, you know, if I don't land it, no one's going to expect it, and if I do land it, no one's going to expect it.
From my perspective, when as I remember filming for Armageddon and sort of that time in Proto, I remember it being, I mean, as you mentioned, it was like a hard time for you because you were taking on like a larger role at just focusing on the business side of Proto. But I remember it being a really turbulent time in a lot of people's lives that were on Proto, and it was like, I don't know, it's just the natural like progression. Like, people were just growing up, and some people were like barely able to scrape together parts. So I was just wondering if you had any stories of like that process and the difficulties, like what you had to overcome for creating Armageddon.
Catalyst, Catalyst is a really, really long video. It's like 50 minutes or something like that. And some of my footage in that video goes back to like 2004, because I didn't really release anything until that Catalyst part came out. I think a lot of us had just been sitting on footage. So, I mean, Proto started in 2008, Catalyst came out in 2010, but a lot of that footage we had all just been kind of sitting on, waiting for a reason to use it, waiting for a project. So I think it was easier for us to put all of that footage together for Catalyst in a certain sense, just because we had so much. And we didn't really have standard. I don't want to say that we didn't have standards. I mean, we definitely had standards, but we didn't really have standards. I mean, we were filming on 20 different types of cameras and every different form. I mean, there was HD clips and SD clips, and
yeah.
I mean, Catalyst is just like a total like mishmash of like footage from anywhere we could possibly get it. Whereas Armageddon, by the time we started working on Armageddon, nobody had any footage left. Like, everything got used for Catalyst. And so in that 2-year span from 2010 to 2012, not only did nobody have any more stockpile of footage to pull from, we had higher standards. We were only going to film with VX. We were only going to use, you know, the Mark I depth lens, and that had the best field of view. So that limited who could film and when they could film, because we were basically calling out, we have to use this camera, we have to use this lens. So all of our footage has a consistent look and feel. Like the standards for Armageddon went way, way up. And it made it very prohibitive for people to just go out and film with their friends anymore. Like like the quality got a lot more serious for that video. And at that same time, we were just growing up, and more companies were getting involved in the sport, and riders started or were being given, like some of the Catalyst team was being given opportunities elsewhere with other companies, and I wasn't really in a position to compete with that. So it was like I understood where they were coming from. Like if you have an opportunity and you think it's going to be good for you, you need to take it. Like, no hard feelings. Like, I wish I could do everything for everybody on the team, but if you guys think that you can do better for yourself somewhere else, then I wish you luck with that, Mm-hmm. So some people parted ways, and I mean, you'll see like the lineup in Armageddon is 6 out of 10 people from Catalyst. So, I mean, we lost 40% of the team, and we gained one person. We gained Jackson Manzi for Armageddon, but unfortunately, and I know you did an interview with him talking about his health issues, but I was super excited to get new blood on the team, and then it didn't quite work out just because he struggled so much with his back issues. So Armageddon was definitely a challenge. Like we were just all growing up. We had different opportunities with maybe other companies, or maybe with jobs and work and school and life. I mean, we weren't kids anymore. Like, we were actually like getting into adulthood and the responsibilities of that, and the standards by which we were filming were much higher, and it just made it more difficult for people to dedicate the time to film the way that we needed to be filming. And I think that's also why a lot of the footage, because my buddy Chris, who was working for me at the time, he was basically like our dedicated trip filmer. And so that's why those San Francisco and Mexico trips were so productive, because, I mean, they had to be productive. We had a filmer, we had the equipment, and if we didn't film on those trips, it would be highly unlikely that we would be able to have that same level of quality just going out and filming, with our friends.
I'm really glad that a lot of people, I mean, I'm trying to think. I feel like a lot of people's parts in Armageddon were sort of like their last real huge effort for scootering, and I'm really glad that they made that effort. Like you, Elmer, I mean, that was like pretty much Elmer's last like full part. Jackson. Stedman's
Armageddon part is awesome. I think he had the most improved video part from Catalyst.
Yeah, but I'm just like, I don't think that a lot of people realize. I was just trying to highlight that sort of moment in time that for a lot of people it was like really hard to get a part together, but I'm just so glad that those people did it, because we're able to look back on it, and it wasn't just like after Catalyst they sort of like fizzled out. Like, there was an actual effort made to, do one last thing.
They kept pushing. And I mean, Armageddon is a very, 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 very different video than Catalyst for a number of reasons. I mean, and most of them we've talked about, but I mean, it's just shorter, a smaller crew, more dedicated filming trips. The quality went way up. Our attention to detail went way up, and it was a challenge. I mean, Catalyst was sort of the unknown, and I guess that was the challenge behind it. We just didn't really know what we were getting into and what it was going to take to complete that project. But with Armageddon, we knew. It just had its own set of challenges. It was good to see us overcome those challenges and actually complete that film. And just to see the difference, like what a shorter production time, more dedicated production time could create.
Do you have any other stories you can think of when you were filming for your partner Armageddon, or maybe like other other trips of other people?
That Mexico trip was pretty eye-opening, too, because, I mean, I live in San Diego, so I'm close to the Mexican border, but I'm close to Tijuana. That's not, like, real Mexico. That's not, like, deep Mexico. So when we did that Mexico trip, we went all the way down to Chema's hometown, Guadalajara. That was authentic Mexico, you know. That was a pretty awesome trip just to see where this dude came from, because Chema was still sort of a mystery. I mean, he sent his sponsor tape in 2009, and he didn't actually get to come to the United States until like 2012. I think for Armageddon was like his first time to the States.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he still was kind of a mystery, and we didn't know anything about the Mexican scene. So that was a pretty awesome trip, just seeing where he came from, the parks he grew up riding, the spots he grew up riding, and just kind of getting that insight on his life and where he came from, because it was so extremely different than literally all of us. And yeah, there was some pretty rough areas down there, though. When I'm in the United States, like I'm pretty confident in the streets, you know, for my safety, because I mean, riding in the streets takes you to some crazy, unexpected places, and sometimes they're not the safest, and sometimes they're pretty damn sketchy. But I've never really felt worried like I did in some of the places we ventured into in Mexico. There was one time when we were in Lake Chapala. That's like a big freshwater lake just outside of Guadalajara, and we took a bus out there, and it was me, Elmer, Chema, and Chris. And we were just exploring out there, and we went, like, there was like a church on this hill, and we decided we wanted to go up and see if there were spots around there. And we did find some spots. There was like a basketball court with these like crazy, like long, super long white ledges. Elmer got a clip on those. But when we were coming back down from that spot, we were walking, you know, through these alleys, and there was just like, I don't know, you know, what their affiliations were, but they just looked like they were just straight up like gang members playing soccer in the street. I'm pretty sure they were gang members playing soccer in the street. And yeah, I remember Chris had his cell phone out, just not even paying attention to his surroundings, and we're walking down the street, and these guys just stopped playing soccer. And they're just staring at us, like beaming us, like, what are you doing walking down our alley? And we've got all the camera gear, all of our scooters. Chris has his iPhone out, just not totally oblivious to what was happening. And I didn't you know, I tried to be like as casual as I possibly could. And I'm just like, Chris, put your phone away. Chris, put your phone in your pocket. And he was like, kind of like, I guess, ignoring me, or didn't realize that I was like talking to him or something. And I'm like, Chris, put your phone in your pocket. And he like looks up at me like, what? Like, what, dude? And I'm just like, and then Chema like looks at him. And then Elmer comes from also like a pretty rough neighborhood. I mean, he's from the Bronx. So Elmer's pretty damn street smart. And like, we're all looking at him like, dude, put your phone in your pocket right now. Just look around you right now. And we like walked by all these dudes, just like they just, it was like silence. Like they just stopped playing soccer, and they were just watching us, like these assumably, you know, rich Americans with camera gear and expensive scooters and smartphones walking down their alley. And still to this day, like I don't know why. I'm amazed that we didn't just get robbed right there. Like, I don't know why we didn't. Like, we totally should have, I feel like, but we didn't.
So moving on from Armageddon, I was wondering what your motivation to start the ScooterCon competition was, and what place do you feel that contests have in today's world of scootering? Do you think they are still relevant?
Competitions will always be relevant. It's like the one venue where people get to go head to head and, you know, see who is actually the best. And I know a lot of street-oriented riders are totally opposed to competitions because they think it, you know, kills your creative ability with riding. And And I do understand that. I mean, it is true. I mean, competitions are more about consistency and variety, and I mean, you're trying to showcase, like, intentionally showcase for the judges everything that you can do, as good as you can do it, as much as you can do it. It's a numbers game. I mean, you're trying to get the highest score to show that you can get a higher score than somebody else. And I understand that does not appeal to a lot of riders, but I think it's still important to have venues like that, just for the sake of, pushing the limits, just seeing how hard people can push their athletic ability and their ability to, perform some of these absolutely insane tricks and combos, and just the consistency that they're able to do it. I mean, and the pressure that they're able to do it under. I think that's another thing too. Like, a lot of street riders, they just hate the pressure of a competition environment. I mean, you really have to be focused and confident and on point for that to not get at you. When I started ScooterCon, it technically wasn't ScooterCon. That's also something that kind of evolved. And I think the first one was, what was it, like 2006, I think, was SD1. And that initially started with Dustin Nooner. So Dustin Nooner is, for anybody who's not familiar with him, he was like one of the original San Diego riders, and he went to the Claremont YMCA a bunch when we were younger, and he started talking to that skate park about putting on a scooter competition, because that was right after Thrill Zone had happened, which was like possibly the first official scooter competition. And so he decided that he wanted to, do the same thing at Claremont, because Claremont was a huge scooter-friendly skate park in San Diego. We got great weather, great park. Why would we not try to do something here? He approached me about, like, helping organize that. And so I kind of took that on. I thought it was a great idea. San Diego's my hometown. Scooter Resources from San Diego. It just seemed like it was something that I was almost kind of obligated to do, like the role that I had put myself in the scooter industry, managing Scooter Resource and, having the SR store and supplying parts to the industry, trying to build the industry and grow the industry. It just seemed fitting to also put on an event that would bring people, like the Scooter Resource Forum brought people together on the internet, but we didn't have anything that brought us together in real life. And so I started kind of thinking about it. I'm like, well, San Diego seems like a perfect place to bring people together. Like, maybe we should, pursue this event and see if we can get the whole industry to come out for it, and use Scooter Resource as kind of the vessel to bring people to this event. Yeah, so that first year was me and Dustin that put that on, and then over the years it just kind of grew and turned into like a Scooter Resource, like brought to you by Scooter Resource event. And then I think it was probably like the 8th year, so about 4 years ago, we didn't really have a name for the event. It was just the San Diego Scooter Competition was the first year. And then the second year we did it, people started calling it, SD2, then SD3, SD4, SD5, SD6. And it was like, okay, like, what is this really though? Like this event is one of the biggest in the world, if not the biggest in the world, single day event. Everybody is coming out from all over. I mean, international riders are traveling to this. Companies are coming out with booths to be part of this event. Like, it's more than just the San Diego scooter competition. It really is like an industry convention. And so San Diego also has the big convention center here, and they do Comic Con. And that's, for the comic book industry and just for the cartoon industry. I mean, that is a massive, massive, massive event. And so I just kind of thought it was fitting, like, hey, Comic Con, Scooter Con, both in San Diego. It seems fitting to to, I guess, rebrand it and call it what it really was. It was this scooter convention. And so, yeah, I think it was SD8 was the first time that we started marketing the San Diego Scooter Competition series as ScooterCon. So, and people call it, I mean, people still call it SD. It's really ScooterCon now, but SD12. Next year will be SD13.
So what was the process with being contacted to get into Nitro Circus? How did that work out?
So Nitro Circus started actually with Matt Mckeen. He had basically re-edited his Philly crew.
Video Journal 9, yeah.
Yeah. So the Video Journal number 9 that Brian Boston put together, I guess Matt wasn't happy with the way it turned out, or just thought that he could do more justice to his footage, or I mean, whatever his motivation was. He re-edited his Philly crew footage, and so that was his TPC revised part. That was the name of the video. When he released that, that was like maybe like one of the first, if not the first, like viral scooter video. It got shared on a bunch of skateboarding websites and a bunch of BMX websites. It was probably like the first scooter video that got wider exposure outside of the scooter community. And that was in 2009. So that was like 6 months after I started Proto is about when that video came out, the revised version. Since Nitro Circus is obviously like huge in action sports, somebody over there, I don't know the exact story or who it was, but somebody affiliated with Nitro Circus saw Matt's TPC revised part. They were totally blown away by it, and they invited Matt to come on the second season of the Nitro Circus MTV show. In the episode that they invited him on, they went out to Bam Margera's house, and he actually was able to bring a guest with him, so he invited Corey Van Loo to go out there with him. So technically, Matt Mckeen and Corey Van Loo were the two first riders on Nitro Circus because of Matt's TPC revised part, and they went out to Bam Margera's house and got to ride on his ramp and get a couple tricks. And so the producer of the MTV show, Dove, he asked Matt, hey, do you know anybody that makes or has, some heavy duty scooters so the rest of the Nitro crew can, try to do tricks with you for the show? And Matt was just like, yeah, talk to Andrew. He's got a company called Proto. And so literally 6 months after I started Proto, I'm getting a call from an MTV producer asking me for scooters. And I'm just like, what the hell? Like, this is insane. And so I made like 5 completes for them, like Proto bars, SES, Senior Fork, the metal core wheels, like all of that was in production by that point. They were still bolted Pro models though. They still had Razor decks because I didn't have a deck in production at that time. So it was like almost a Proto complete, but not quite. And I sent those out to them. So if you actually watch that episode from the second season when Matt's on there, you can see the scooters that the other dudes are riding are like actually like bolted Pro models with all Proto components that I made for them. And then after that, I didn't hear anything, that they filmed that show went on TV, and then it was just kind of like radio silence. And then maybe 3 or 4 months later, it was like in the fall, might have been closer to like 6 months later. It was like December of 2009. I get a call from Dove again, and he basically said, we don't really know what happened to those scooters. They kind of just like disappeared after we filmed, but we need more. We have another project coming up and we want scooters to be involved with it. Are you able to make more scooters for us? And I was like, yeah, I can totally supply you guys with more scooters, but he kind of had like a sense of urgency. He's like, we need them this weekend. And I think actually that was the weekend that I was going out to New York. I told him, I was like, I'm literally going to New York for a filming trip tomorrow. Like, if you want them by this weekend, I'm going to have to like make them tonight or something And I really don't want to do that unless it's like really critically important that you have them this weekend. Like, what is this project? Why is this so important? Like, can it wait until I get back? And he was like, well, we have a private mega ramp that we built out in the desert, and we're going to be doing a live Nitro Circus stadium touring show on a mega ramp. It's going to start in Australia, and right now Australia is like the kids in Australia love scooters, and the producers of this show really want scooters to be part of this show. So we really need scooters out there this weekend for the first practice to see if scooters are going to be able to ride this ramp. And I was just like, oh my God, scooters plus a mega ramp in Southern California in my backyard. Like, this is insane. And so I just asked him, I was like, okay, look, like, that's a good enough reason for me to make you scooters. Like, I'm totally on board for this. Like, I also want to see scooters on the mega ramp. And then I just asked him, I was like, hey, like, so do you have a scooter rider that can ride the mega ramp? Or are you just going to like hope that your Nitro Circus crew can jump the mega ramp on a scooter? Or do you actually like want somebody who can ride it and do tricks on it? And he was like, well, I mean, that would be awesome if you know anybody that can ride a mega ramp. And I was like, you just tell me what day I can come out there. And so I went on that filming trip to New York that weekend. I missed the first official, like, you know, Nitro mega ramp practice, but they had another one scheduled for like 2 more weeks out. And so when I went to New York, I talked to Brian Murphy, because me and him always talked about the mega ramp, you know, like just the fastest, highest, farthest air you could possibly get on a scooter. And we were both just all about it. And so I talked to Dove, and I was like, hey, like, I'll come out. I can also bring another rider if you guys are cool with me bringing a guest out. And he was like, yeah, totally. Like, the two of you guys can come out and just see what you got. And so like 2 weeks later, I flew Brian to California, and the two of us went out to the next practice session on the Mega. And yeah, for first jump, like rolling down the Roland the first time was a little nerve-wracking, because I had dreamed about it for like almost 10 years since I was watching Danny Way in the DC video, you know, and I'm just like, oh my God, like, I'm actually going to have an opportunity to do that on a scooter. It's like a dream come true. But yeah, rolling in on the Roland the first time, I think I was on like a 19-inch deck, 4.5 inches wide, like 20 tall bars. Like, it was like a baby scooter, like got speed wobbles, and luckily made it to the lip and through a Superman grab. Like, my first jump on the Mega, I did a Superman Indian Air, and it felt absolutely unreal. And yeah, needless to say, they liked what they saw, and I got invited to go on tour with them. And that was basically, the first tour was the beginning of 2010, and then we did 2 more tours in Australia and New Zealand in 2011, and then we did the Nitro Circus live Las Vegas show for the 3D movie. That was like in the summer of 2011. And that was the last official show that I rode with them. I think I rode 27 shows in total, I think, over the course of 3 tours and the Vegas show. The second Australian tour was like the regional Australian tour, and I think that one was like 11 stops or something like that. And 4 of those shows, Ryan Williams and Max Peters and Mitch Baldry, those 3 guys came out and rode the ramp. And then that was basically like Ryan Williams' introduction to Nitro Circus. And then I went and did the New Zealand tour, and then I did the Vegas show. And then the next time around, like for the next upcoming Australian tour, they reached out to Ryan to get him to come on the tour down there. Since he's from Australia, it made sense to have him. And then after that, Ryan just, like, I mean, he is an extremely talented individual. That's all I got to say. He is an action sports phenomenon. As soon as he got the spotlight on him on that ramp and started touring with Nitro, it was like, you know, the rest is history. Now he's got an X Games gold medal on BMX, and he pretty much just dominates on anything that he touches with wheels. So for somebody to take my job, I happily bow out to him.
Yeah, he's done some incredible stuff on the Mega Ramp. I was wondering, do you have any Nitro Circus tour stories? Because you were touring with some like pretty high profile people like Travis Pastrana.
Pretty much like the whole tour is one crazy story after another. I mean, just, I don't know, it was like an overwhelming amount of just raw energy touring with that group of people. And it was, I'm pretty happy, you know, that I got to experience that very, very first live tour. I mean, the energy on that first live tour was, it's kind of like hard to explain. Like those first Australian capital city shows were just so over the top. I mean, the level of riding wasn't where it is now on the live tours, you know, like everybody basically throwing triple flips. Like it definitely wasn't at that level, but just the fact that it was such a new thing that everybody was doing. I mean, it was new for me, but it was new for everybody. Like no one else had done live tours except, well, I mean, some of the motocross guys, or actually probably most of the motocross guys, they'd all been doing like the Krusties, like Demons of Dirt tour. So, and that's kind of like, I guess, more part of motocross culture to, you know, put on, you know, the exhibition shows and demos and stuff. That's kind of more part of the motocross industry than it is for other sports. So they were a little more used to, you know, the stadium performances and stuff. But like for everybody else, it was like totally new and crazy. I think the only other person who had done anything like that was the Tony Hawk Boom Boom Huck Jam tour. I mean, some of the people had experience with that, but for a lot of us, it was just like a totally new, crazy adventure that we were going on. And yeah, it was pretty memorable. I don't know if I have like really one specific story. I guess when I got my mustache cut in Adelaide at one of the after parties, I mean, we were all wasted partying, and I just see a pair of scissors like flash in the corner of my eye, and I didn't even realize that my mustache had gotten cut because I was pretty intoxicated, and then everybody started screaming and going like absolutely wild, and then I like reach and feel my face, and just half of my mustache was gone, and I'm just like, all right, well, I didn't cut it for I don't know how many years, and I was just kind of like on a mission to see how long it could go, and well, that's how long it went. I think the longest it ever got was like 12 inches tip to tip, and then it got snipped at that show. It was pretty funny too, because Travis ran outside because like words started spreading like, they cut Scoot's mustache, they cut his mustache, and everybody was like freaking out. And then and I'm like just drunk in the street, like walked out of the bar when I realized that my mustache got cut. Like I wasn't sure if I was like sad or angry or, you know, or like how I should feel because I had been violated, you know. And then like Travis comes out and he's like, no, Scoot your mustache. It was a wild tour. You know, I kind of like went into the whole Nitro Circus thing. Like I was the first scooter rider, you know, representing the sport and the industry on a mainstream level. And so, I don't know, I kind of went in there a little bit with like a chip on my shoulder. I would say maybe not a little bit. Like I kind of had like a big chip on my shoulder when I was on tour, you know. I'm like, you guys want to just talk shit because I ride a scooter? Like I'm not here to put up with that bullshit. I'm here to show the world that scooters are real. We're here to stay, and we got a bigger bag of tricks than all of you. And ultimately, like I'm not even the one that proved that. Like Ryan is the one that really showed the world what the true potential on a scooter was. But I was just there, you know, just to just to show everybody that scooters weren't just some pushover little kid toy. You know, I was there to make a statement, and I guess all things considered, I made a pretty good statement.
Yeah, I think it definitely legitimatized it more especially in that space of sort of just like mainstream like motocross and BMX and stuff like that. That's such a hard world to break into for scooters because it's just, I don't know, it's like easier in like the sort of like smaller venues and stuff like that, but that's so tough, just like mainstream America like accepting scooters.
Yeah, and I guess I was like an easy target, like the older hippie looking dude with the long hair and the big mustache riding a little kid's toy. I was like an easy target to pick at, and I don't know. I just looked at it, if I'm already doing something different, I might as well be really, really different. If they're going to think I'm, some weirdo riding a scooter, I might as well, fit the part and be the weirdo riding the scooter and take a hit for the team, take a hit for the scooter industry and just, let them get that out of their system so the next generation of scooter riders, hopefully will be more accepted than the early generation when it was still like this weird new foreign sport that no one really knew what it was, and it was just easier to make fun of it than to accept it. I was willing to be that punching bag if it elevated scooters to a mainstream level. And it did. I mean, it totally did. So whatever.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned before, like filming for Armageddon, it was like pretty difficult because you had so many work responsibilities. So how was it trying to balance those responsibilities as like a scooter rider and a company owner of Proto? And were you always in sort of like, oh, I should do this more, I should do this more? Was it hard to sort of like pick and eventually like focus more on the business side of Proto?
I mean, literally everything that I've ever done in my career now has my goal was to be able to ride. Like, I loved riding scooters and I knew I wanted to do it for as long as I possibly could. So everything that I've done has been a means to that end. Like, I started a scooter company. I started designing scooter parts. I created a community. I created some of the biggest events in the industry, and I did that kind of selfishly. Actually, I mean, it's totally selfish. Like, I loved scooters and I wanted to ride scooters. And the only way that I could do that forever was if there was an industry surrounding my passion that allowed me to survive riding scooters or being part of a scooter community and industry. So, I really do care about the scooter industry, and I really want to see the scooter industry do well, and I want other people to have the same opportunities that I had, but it was very selfish, I loved it, and I wanted to do the thing that I loved forever. And so when the business kind of took the lead in my life, I started realizing, the means to my end are now becoming the end, like now my role is a business owner and a company manager, and that never has still, I kind of struggle with that, but like back then it was way, way more difficult on my psyche and my morale because I had just spent, 2 years being the quote unquote #1 scooter rider in the world when I was touring with Nitro Circus, and then to just not be in that position anymore and just like wake up and go to work. And granted, I was still working in the scooter industry, but that was supposed to be a means to the end of me riding. And then it kind of ultimately ended my riding, which I don't know, that definitely is something that I struggled with for a while. I always thought, if I can find some way to balance work and riding, like maybe I can, still stay competitive, and maybe I'll have another opportunity with Nitro, or maybe I'll have another opportunity, pursuing my riding in some other direction. But what ended up happening is my company was suffering and my riding was suffering. Like, I wasn't doing anything well. And so I had to accept that if I was going to do something well, I had to dedicate my entire self to it. And as a rider, I saw less of a future dedicating myself 100% to riding. So I had to swallow a very hard pill and dedicated myself 100% to the company. And I still enjoy riding from time to time. I wish I could do it more, and I hope that one day after we kind of hopefully overcome these growing pains, that things will stabilize and I'll have a better support network and better infrastructure and, you know, take a step back from the company at least a little bit to, you know, dedicate myself to riding a little bit more. I mean, I definitely, like, I want to film one last video part. Like, I'm not happy with my Reincarnate video part is not even a video part. Like, that was just like a few clips that I was able to hang on to over the course of a few years, and my ender is literally just me breaking my leg, because that was like ultimately where my skill level was at from working so much and not riding enough and trying to ride like I used to, and then getting broken off. Like that's not a video part. I felt obligated to have a presence in the video because I'm the owner of the company and everybody touts rider owned, and it's like, well, if the owner is saying rider owned and the owner's not in the video, is it really rider owned? So I felt obligated to put some clips in there just to show, you know, I still do love riding and I wish I could do it more, but that was not a video part, and I'm definitely not happy or satisfied with it. I just kind of felt obligated to have an appearance in the video. But I do want to, at some point before I'm too far gone, film one last epically gnarly video part.
I kind of see that sacrifice like as you sacrificing your riding to focus more on the company. I mean, think about how many people's lives you're inspiring to start riding. So it's like, just because you're one sole individual, like, you can inspire, like, you know, hundreds of people to start scootering or like continue scootering through the work you do with your company.
That's definitely part of the rewarding part of my job. You know, I literally own a company that makes scooters that you go do tricks on. Like, it's surreal when I wake up and I'm like, this is really my life. Like, I literally effectively own a toy company that makes really awesome toys. Like that's crazy to me that it actually became a real job and a career. And if I had to give up riding scooters to go work at Home Depot or something, I think Home Depot would be a kind of a cool job if I wasn't doing this, but McDonald's or something, you know, like if I had to give up my riding just to pursue like an average life, that would have been even harder for me to stomach than giving up my riding to pursue a scooter company that's still in the industry that I love and that I help create. So yeah, I'm pretty content with what I'm doing.
Yeah, I know you mentioned so you mentioned the injury you had in Reincarnate when you broke your leg in Guadalajara on that half pipe. In the video you guys just released, the Europe vacation, I was so surprised to see you in it. I had no idea that you were going to be in it riding. It was like so sick to see. So what was that that journey like of breaking your leg and then recovering from that?
Arguably, I'm still on the journey.
Okay, yeah.
It was a pretty gnarly break. Did like some pretty decent damage in my leg. Yeah, that was just me being overconfident, rusty, and sloppy. And when I crashed, I was like at my all-time heaviest weight because I was just eating and drinking and working and not really riding. And then I go on this trip, you know, 20 pounds, probably like 25 pounds heavier than I was in Armageddon. So, I mean, imagine if you have like a 25-pound weight, a 25-pound dumbbell. If you dropped it from like 12 feet onto your shin, what would you expect to happen? And that's basically what happened. Everything in my ankle tore loose. My foot went backwards, and then all of my weight just went straight into my tib and fib and just like exploded everything. And it's just like, God damn it. Like, how could you be so reckless? Like, I was pretty extremely angry with myself. Not so much that I crashed, that I just let myself go that much and like somehow thought in my head that I could still ride like that if I wasn't, you know, actively maintaining my riding ability.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty rough patch. I was no weight bearing for 12 weeks. So like 3 months, no weight bearing. I didn't actually get screws. They got like titanium buttons that have like cables laced through them that are like tying my tib and fib together. So with pins, like everything's pinned pretty solid, so you can kind of like start weight bearing a little bit earlier, but also eventually you have to get the pins removed, and the pins like kind of restrict your articulation, your natural movement with your tib and fib. So it would have meant I would have had to get a second surgery. So by getting cables, it was a longer recovery time, but hopefully I don't have to have a second surgery to get them removed. It's like basically permanent in there. Mm-hmm. But because they're more flexible, the healing process was kind of a little bit longer. Part of my rehab, I started getting really into like rock climbing. Well, I actually was already rock climbing before I got injured, but I really got into it after the injury just because it was like relatively low impact, high strength training. And I mean, to be a good climber, you have to have excellent strength to weight ratio. After being basically overweight and injuring myself because of that, because I wasn't strong enough for my weight, I really kind of like started obsessing over climbing and just like leaning out and building up muscle and cutting down fat and like trying to, like just maintain myself the way that I was when I was riding in my prime.
So I'm assuming you were doing like rope climbing, not bouldering?
Bouldering, but like in a gym with like a padded floor, like not like in a very, very extremely controlled environment where I felt safe that I wasn't going to blow my ankle out. Because I still feel it. Like I'll probably feel it forever. Like that's pretty much like a guarantee I'm going to feel it forever. I pretty much like wasn't able to do anything till about 6 months. And then at about 6 months is when I started climbing again, started jogging. I mean, I wasn't able to walk for 3 months. And then so from 3 to 6 months was just kind of like re-strengthening and stretching. And then after I felt somewhat comfortable that everything was stabilized, then I started climbing and doing light jogging. And it's pretty much like, I mean, I think it's as good as it's going to be. It's not 100%, and it probably never will be 100%, but it's decent enough, I'm just trying to like safely maintain myself long enough to hopefully get the company slightly on cruise control.
Yeah.
and enough so I can actually get back on the scooter and start filming again.
Yeah, but like I said, that was just so cool to see you in that European vacation video. That was a surprise. I don't think anybody was really expecting that.
It was definitely a struggle. Like, I mean, the clips are nothing like too crazy, but I mean, for considering what happened and like where I was at in the recovery process, like I'll take those clips, like I'm not going to stress over that. 'Cause I mean, it was like, it didn't look like much, but I definitely felt it when I was filming for that stuff. Definitely was not like super comfortable.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely made the clips more important because of the context, and I'm not even sure, like, because like information is so fragmented and everything moves so fast now, I feel like a lot of people didn't even realize that those were your clips coming back from the injury.
And like how many kids even took the time to watch a 55-minute full-length video and even saw that crash or knew that crash happened, and they're just like watching this dude, do like a downside whip on a big roof, and they're like, oh, so-and-so could have like flare buttercupped that. Yeah. It's like, yeah, maybe they could have flare buttercupped it, but that ain't me.
Yeah, definitely. When I was writing these questions, I was just like browsing through the Proto site to think of some stuff, and if I'm pretty sure I'm correct that Alex and Chema are the only original riders left on the team. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe that's accurate.
Okay. So what is it? I mean, it was like kind of a change, like filming for Armageddon and adding Jackson, but I think now you're like fully in this new era where it's like the second generation. I mean, you introduced all these people through Intermission, and now it's just like fully an entirely new team. So what is it like working with this whole new set of like personalities and riding styles?
Originally, Intermission was supposed to be the second video, and it was supposed to happen in between Catalyst and Armageddon. I had like this like grand plan for like a 3-video box set: Catalyst the beginning, Intermission the middle, and Armageddon the end. Like we talked about earlier, like Armageddon the years following Catalyst just got difficult for everybody, you know, just growing up, getting jobs, going to school. Finding time to ride and film was just more of a challenge. So what I thought was a realistic timeline totally was not a realistic timeline to fit 3 videos in 3 years. So Intermission just kind of got backburnered. We went straight to Armageddon, and then it was a struggle just to finish Armageddon. And then after Armageddon, it like the struggle just continued, and we slowly just kept losing riders just to real life responsibilities, I guess. Or I don't know if I would say they lost interest. Like, they were still interested. It was just hard to survive and be at that level forever, you know? And then I think it was about 2014, so maybe like 2 years after Armageddon, might have been 3 years. 2014, 2015 is when Mckeen came over to TGE and Proto and River, and he basically just kind of, I mean, he had been backing Addict for many, many years, and I think it just got to a point where he wanted to, kind of on the same note as some of our original Catalyst team, you know, pursuing other opportunities with other sponsors. Matt was kind of doing the same thing with Addict, and he wanted to see, you know, what his future could be like with different companies and different sponsors. And we had been friends forever. He had been coming out to the San Diego events since I think probably like SD2 or something. He had stayed with me. So well over 10 years. And so he made that switch, and part of his responsibility when he came on was to kind of breathe new life back into the Proto team that was slowly slipping away piece by piece, rider by rider. We kind of pulled Intermission off the back burner and made that the new project. You know, let's build a new team and let's make a new video. Intermission totally is a full-length video. We just never put the parts in order and uploaded it as a start-to-finish video. And it's not like somebody had first part and somebody had last part, but it is a full video. It just kind of came out in segments. You know, we were trying to like introduce each person individually, because it didn't make sense to release a full video with a bunch of people that no one had seen ride for Proto before. You know, it's not like they had welcome edits. So Intermission was kind of like their introduction parts to the team. And then after that came out, you know, then we basically when we started the Intermission team, everybody knew like Intermission is going to be your introduction, and then we're going to work on a full-length team video, which was Reincarnate. That was like the next video on the timeline. And so from Intermission to Reincarnate, we probably lost half of the Intermission team, to the same reasons why we lost half the Catalyst team, the same reasons why we lost half the Armageddon team. I mean, people just have real lives and real obligations and responsibilities, and interests change and passions change. And so not everybody from Intermission made it to Reincarnate, but we had enough people who were still around from Catalyst and Armageddon days, and enough people from the Intermission team to still have a full lineup and produce a full video, and that was Reincarnate.
I'm trying to think of the TGE trips that you've been doing.
Oh my God, the Texas trip. The Texas trip was an absolute nightmare. That's honestly why I think we lost half of the intermission team. Because that was like after intermission came out, then we started filming for Reincarnate and just started taking like TGE trips. And that first maiden voyage of the TGE van was on that Texas trip, and it was grueling. We had no idea like what we were getting into. It was just like a frigid wasteland. Like we thought, the weather would probably be good during the winter time in the south. It's not going to be too bad. It was like freezing cold every single day. In El Paso, the wind was blowing so hard at the campground we were trying to stay at. Like Logan's tent just blew away while he was trying to set it up. We ended up camping inside a cinder block bathroom, like on the bathroom floor at the campground, because that's the only place that we could escape the wind. It was like 30 degrees. Everything was frozen. Like it wasn't snowing, but it was like practically blizzard conditions. That was like the first or second night on the trip, and that just like set the whole tone for the rest of the trip. Everybody was like frozen and miserable, packed into this van, 11 people driving from San Diego to, we were supposed to go to Austin, and we never made it that far because the street jam got rained out and got relocated to San Antonio. So the Austin street jam turned into the San Antonio street jam at the DIY under the bridge, and it was raining there and it was freezing there, and then we ended up having a big bonfire under the bridge just to keep everybody warm who showed up for the jam. And everything about that trip was just insane. And pretty much after that trip, like there were certain riders that never went on another trip with us. It was kind of like the make or break trip. Like if you were in that van with us and drove to Texas and you're still around, like you got what it takes. If you couldn't handle it, you're probably not around anymore because you didn't have what it took. And then we had a blowout in New Mexico on the drive home at it was like 4 a.m. I was driving doing like 80 miles an hour. We had like 2,000 pounds of gear and 1,000 pounds of people, or maybe vice versa, 2,000 pounds of bodies and 1,000 pounds of gear. We were loaded 3,000 pounds though. We did the math, and rear tire blew out. Luckily, there was no other cars on the road. There was no ditches on the side of the road because that van was like sideways. Like very, very lucky that we did not roll the van. Had to call AAA to come change the tire. We were waiting on the side of the road for like 2 hours. But lucky we had like all the coolers and food and the full camp kitchen in the back of the van. So while we were waiting for the guy to come change the tire, because we had the lug wrench, but the lug wrench wasn't deep enough to reach all the way onto the lug. So we had a spare tire and we had a lug wrench. It just wasn't deep enough. So we were just like stranded, and we set up the whole camp kitchen on the side of the highway, and we were just like cooking up burgers, like breakfast burgers and breakfast dogs, like just on the side of the road as the sun was coming up in the middle of New Mexico. And there was like a big freight train parked like right on the tracks, just idling all night long. Nobody was in the cab, so we had a few hours to kill, so we were all like running around on this freight train, just like looking around and exploring because there was nothing else to do. And we had, the kitchen was cooking food, and we were just running around in the desert waiting for the tow truck to get there and change our tire. And that's pretty much like if you watch the TGE Texas video, that's like the end of the video, like us just sitting on the side of the road grilling, and then the video is just over.
And what was what are some other trips you've done like that? There's the one where you did the Northwest, right? Were there any other ones?
There was a Chicago trip.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So the Chicago trip was actually like pretty decent on the way there. So that was like 3 years ago. So when I was on that trip, one of my grandfathers died. Well, actually, they both died about 6 months apart from each other in 2015, so about 3 years ago. And one of them passed away when I was on that trip. So I actually booked a flight out of Chicago to go to his funeral in Louisiana. So I was only on half of that trip. But the drive home on that trip turned into quite a nightmare. You would probably have to ask the dudes that were on that trip more about it, because I only heard it, word of mouth. But they got stranded in Colorado. I can't even remember what the name of the little town is, but I know they all have it seared into their memory because they were stranded there for like 3 days waiting for parts to come in to repair the radiator on the van. And they were just like living in like a little mountain town, like sleeping in the park or something, camping in the city park, waiting for the van to get fixed for like 3 days. That was another trying time for the dudes on the team. And I think that trip also weeded out a few more people who didn't quite have the gumption to stick around, I guess you could say. And then the Northwest trip, I just didn't go on that trip.
Oh, okay.
And again, going back to my responsibilities with the company, it's pretty difficult for me to find time to go anywhere for a week or two. I mean, some of those trips are usually at least 10 days long when we take the van out. So it's just really difficult for me to find time to peel myself away from the office and the factory to go on those trips.
I would say in the past maybe 3 years that the scootering has changed really dramatically, just kind of in every aspect, it seems like to me. I was wondering if you could think of any like key moments, like decisions you made to adapt to the changing scooter industry in these past like maybe like 3 or 4 years of like hyper social media, almost like scootering as like virtual reality, where scootering is like more present, not in real life than in real life.
I mean, I do my best to keep it as real as I can, like whatever that means. I do feel like the social media virtual world is not that real. I mean, it's so heavily curated. You're seeing what people want you to see.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a total marketing game. You're not really seeing the real grimy truth. And I guess I try to, as a brand and a company, we have to play that game just to stay relevant. I try not to adulter the truth too much. Like what you see is what you get with us, or at least I would like it to be that way. We have to work the social media like it's a job, because it is our job. We have to make sure we have good content and it's coming out regularly, and that the people who want to see stuff from us are actually getting to see stuff from us and keep us relevant in the minds of the purchasing public. I mean, everything is very business minded. It is a real business. I have employees to pay. I have team riders to pay. I have to come up with money to send people on trips and buy and repair camera equipment. So, I mean, I do have to think like that. I mean, it's a naive mentality for people to say, oh, like it's not all about the money, but it kind of is all about the money, because nobody is going to do this forever for free. Nobody can afford to do it forever for free. That's just not the reality of the world we live in. We have to think about money to survive and to sustain. So it's very idealistic to say it's not all about the money. I would almost guarantee that anybody who's saying that is still living with their parents and has their free ride paid for. So, but you can still enjoy what you love to do. We haven't really done, aside from the way that we have, kind of strategically worked on social media, we haven't really adapted too much. I kind of like to see Proto as a trendsetter, not a follower. And so you don't really have to adapt that much if you're the one leading the industry. Other people have to adapt in order to follow. I would say the one compromise, or an example of a compromise that I've made, is the new baby SCS that is, I guess, the 10-year anniversary model. It's the first time we've done any updates to the clamp since they were released. The new baby SCS is going to have a shim to accommodate oversized bars, which I really didn't want to do, but oversized bars are so prominent in the industry, with everybody running HIC or IHC with aluminum bars. That was just one of those things where if I am going to stress the importance of compatibility and I'm selling a product that's not compatible with a very prominent size of component on the market, then I'm not being true to my own mission of ultimate compatibility. So putting a shim and making the baby SCS adaptable to both size bars was a compromise that I've made. But there's not too many things that I've like really changed to, adapt to the industry. We pretty much just had our direction and stuck to it, and are still going to continue moving in that direction.
It seems like you have definitely found a way to balance the videos, though, because now you do these like really great trip videos, and I think that is sort of like a newer mentality.
Yeah, that is, I guess, another way that our media has adapted. I love watching a full-length like film of any type. I think they're captivating and they transport you to another place in time. Unfortunately, I don't know if kids today share that same sentiment. I don't know if they have the attention span to sit through full movies anymore. Like, I feel like of the three, well, if you count Intermission, the 4 full-length films that we've released, like, I don't know. I think probably our last film, Reincarnate, probably got the least, maybe not like literally the least, but proportionally the least amount of exposure, just because it was so long and it came out in a period of time where everybody is fixated on like instant gratification through constantly updating social media feeds. So, I mean, the longest video you get to watch is 60 seconds, and then it's on to the next, on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. And it's just changed the way that people digest media. And so as much as I love full-length videos, I really probably feel that Reincarnate might be our last full-length video, and we've sort of started gearing up for more frequent, shorter films, specifically like these tour videos that we've been doing. We did the Texas, Northwest, Chicago, and we have actually a few more coming out. There was an LA trip that video's in the works right now, like a Camp Woodward video that's going to be coming out. So the goal now is not so much to sit on footage and save footage, because I mean, with the level of writing and the progression right now, if you wait for 2 years, that footage will go stale. And if you wait for 2 years for your stale footage to come out in an industry that doesn't want to watch long videos anymore, you've basically thrown away your writing and your exposure and your marketing capacity. Unfortunately, I really just think that the future is, these shorter kind of team montages. And maybe if somebody's like totally killing it and they film just a crazy amount of footage, maybe give them their own dedicated part in a larger project. Mm-hmm. But the expectation of having everybody film a full video part without giving them, a few years to do it, it's kind of asking too much, I think.
So we're coming up really soon on the 10-year anniversary to Proto. What does that mean to you? Is it a crazy feeling? Does it even feel real?
I mean, I think by the time this interview comes out, it will be 10 years. Yeah, December 1st. December 1st is the 10-year anniversary. So, I mean, like I said earlier, it's like weird for me to wake up and realize that my life is literally running a scooter company. Yeah, I mean, the fact that like the original freestyle scooter company is going to be a decade old in like literally a week from now, next Saturday. Yeah, I don't know if I've like fully processed it yet. Like time has flown by. Like it still feels like Catalyst was just yesterday, I feel like it sounds like so cliche to say, like, oh man, time just flies by, but man, time like actually just flew by.
it's so weird to like go on like the last trip I was on right now. It's just interesting to like be with a bunch of scooter riders I've known forever, and like everybody is just turning more and more into an adult and like trying to balance their scootering with like their responsibilities. And yeah, it doesn't seem like it was that long ago where we could just like not like spend all summer like 3 months straight just scootering and not worrying about anything.
That doesn't exist much past 18 or 19 or 20, depending on who you are.
Yeah, I know. So just wrapping it all up. So like obviously you've shaped scootering through like videos, you know, the parts you've created through Proto and like the contest series you started. What are your future ambitions? Are there any like goals you have?
My main goal always and forever is just to, well, hopefully not forever. Hopefully I can reach the goal and it will no longer have to be a goal, but standardizing every bit of scooter construction. I know one-piece decks have really, really allowed a lot of progression and contributed a lot to our industry, but I still deeply believe that the TDI system is the future. Just having interchangeable modular components that all work perfectly together. I'm convinced that is the future. I just have to fine tune the manufacturing and fine tune the whole system itself. I mean, we make everything either under this roof or within a 1 hour radius of our facility. So it's not like I'm sending designs to China or Taiwan and waiting for my shipment to come in. Like, we have to come up with the ideas and then we have to figure out how to make them as efficiently as possible. And those are challenges that most other companies don't have to deal with. They just send their designs and let the China factory or whatever, wherever their factories are, they let them figure out all of those challenges. But for us, like, we have to do it here in-house. So, I mean, just developing tooling and manufacturing techniques to minimize the cost and maximize the performance of the designs while trying to compromise as little as you can with the final product. It's a pretty big challenge, but I think that once all of our production lines are set up for all of our components, I believe that I will have standardized every aspect of scooter construction. So that is like still my driving force, is just to standardize everything. I think once everything has been standardized, we can kind of just, I mean, hopefully I'll be able to put the company on somewhat of an autopilot. Once all the R&D is complete and we're just focusing on production, we can just focus on getting things to run like clockwork. And then hopefully, I guess ultimately my goal is to get back on a scooter and to film one last video part, like really, really film for a video part, and hopefully not have to worry and stress about, you know, the health and security of my company as much as I have the last 10 or 15 years, depending on where you start the clock. It's been some very trying years, and it's taken a lot of my time and energy to keep this place moving forward, and hopefully it can stabilize, and hopefully I can walk out into the warehouse and build a complete scooter right off the shelf and go and film and not have to worry about the day-to-day operations and the routines. Hopefully we can get all that dialed in and it'll just run itself. But that's a tall ask, and I would be very surprised if my involvement will ever drop that much. I'm still going to have to be here a lot to get it to that point. I still have a lot of ideas for the future of the industry, just with ScooterCon and the SD series, and just trying to legitimize that event more and more each year, and just bringing the community together. I would like to dedicate a lot more time to Scooter Resource at some time in the future. I feel like the with social media, everything is so diluted and disconnected. I do think that the scooter industry is in desperate need of that community again, which I feel like it's lost since I have spent so much time and energy focused on Proto and now River and TGE distribution and helping Heligrip, with their brand and their distribution. And that's taken a massive amount of my time, and Scooter Resource kind of got put on the back burner. But I do feel that Scooter Resource is every bit as relevant, or the need for Scooter Resource is every bit as relevant today as it was when I started it. And I would really like to see Scooter Resource become that, unifying hub for the community again. And then also I am still working with Nitro Circus. I'm the sports organizer for the Nitro World Games, so I have that event coming up next week. Actually, the Nitro World Games scooter best trick is on December 1st, which is Proto's 10-year anniversary. So I'm actually going to be in Paris, France at the Nitro World Games for the Proto 10-year. Hopefully all those guys want to party in Paris with me.
It's pretty exciting.
There's a lot of stuff on the future checklist, but there's only so many hours in a day. So my biggest challenge right now is just prioritizing what projects to take on. I don't know. I feel like we could just keep on talking for hours about all kinds of random stuff. I don't know what's like.
Yeah.
What's like the most relevant punchline I could throw in at the end that would be any more than anything we've already talked about? I don't know.
I think this episode is probably going to be the longest episode I've done.
How long has it been? 3 hours?
4?
Oh shit.
I mean, I think really like the essence of what we both wanted to cover, we've covered, so.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for doing this podcast, and thank you for the opportunity to be on your show. I appreciate it. I appreciate the consideration, and my apologies that it took a year to actually get on the phone with you to do it. Yeah, my plate's been full, and I wanted a few more things checked off my list before I talked to you about it. Yeah, I got a lot of new stuff coming up this year and next year, just on the never-ending mission of releasing new components and innovative designs and compatibility. And yeah, there's still a lot of stuff that no one has seen that they will soon be seeing. So I hope people are excited for the future.
Yeah, it's just good to hear that you're still pushing on.
Always and forever, onwards, upwards.
Yeah.
Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent.
That's a good quote to end it at, I guess.
The best.
All right, well, I'll end this call, but thanks a lot for doing this. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan.
All right, see ya.
Bye.
All right, that's it for episode 19. I hope you enjoyed the longest tandem episode I've ever done, but I also, before I started recording it, I expected it to be the longest tandem episode I've ever done. We both feel like we didn't really scratch the surface, as we said, and it's so crazy that we recorded for so long, and there's just so many other stories. But I mean, you can only talk for so long. So I think what we got down was really the gist of what was important. So I was glad to do that. And as always, thanks to Ben Bursell for the graphic design and music for this show. As most of you have noticed, I missed the upload date on the episode for last month. I was just busy doing other things and working, and just feeling kind of uninspired to work on this podcast, but I will try to stay on the monthly upload schedule. So I am glad that it's appreciated, because I got some messages from people that month saying, hey, where is it? I really want to listen to it. So I'm glad it's not like I'm just not uploading and it's kind of going unnoticed, because that would definitely give me a sense of, what's the point of even doing it. So I'm glad it's still being well received, and I will continue to do it as much as I possibly can with my other life responsibilities. So thanks for listening. Expect a new episode on the last Friday of next month. Bye.